Give it up, baby. I've studied all your moves.
Yeah, study this!
Yo, what's good, everybody? And welcome to the first annual Techies? Is that what we're calling this? No, I don't know. Well, it's the end of year stuff. We're talking about the stuff that happened in 2022 in MMA, but mostly the UFC. I didn't really intend for this show to end up being so UFC centric, but the UFC just like has a way of dominating the market, and I haven't really been keeping up with stuff like PFL and Bellator as much as I probably should be because a lot of the events just suck. Like Bellator's been having main events like Peter Queally versus Benson Henderson. There's only so many hours in the day. Come on. So there's some stuff going on in here, but yeah, mostly we're looking at all the stuff that happened in UFC in 2022. We're doing a bunch of the kind of dumb generic award categories that everyone does that are stupid and don't really mean anything. And I don't want to get too bogged down in picking what is the winner out of each category, because I feel like it's probably just going to be more interesting to use these categories to, have reflective discussions about the best fights and best fighters of the year and all of that stuff. But then we'll still probably want to pick a winner because, it's fun. It's like how when we're doing fight analysis, actually picking who's going to win the fight is like the least interesting part, but it is fun. So should we jump in this bitch?
Yep, sounds good.
Okay, so we didn't even have best fighter of the year because
that's too generic.
Yeah, and yeah, well, what does that even mean? Just like who had the best accomplishments and best wins? I guess it's kind of between Volkanovski or Makhachev, who respectively have an incredibly impressive era-defining performance in a title fight and a kind of a squash match over an old beloved veteran. I guess you could throw in someone like Alex Pereira just for getting the title within 3 fights in the UFC and having a knockout win over a solid top 5 guy who's very hard to knock out, and then a sick come from behind 5th round KO to capture the title against an old rival. That shit was cool. But the first actual one we got is best fight. And again, what do people mean by best fight? And I try to not just have it come down to most amount of brain damage that happened within a fight is normally what people define this by. For example, last year I personally wasn't too hot on Justin Gaethje, Michael Chandler as a fight of the year, just because it just had a bunch of weird decision making and a weird 3rd round. But what were the good fights that happened this year? Jiri versus Glover, one that people are talking about a lot.
I feel like Jiri Glover was very good, but it wasn't. It felt like a 2014 fight that would have been what people are saying is oh my god, it's one of the craziest fights ever. It was good, but it didn't feel like a modern fight.
No, it was a fight that I was definitely engaged and invested in everything that was happening as it was playing out. It was a fight that I praised when it happened for just a fight like that is in some ways what fighting is about. There was just such ridiculously insatiable will to win on both sides, but it was an incredibly silly fight. Again, with a bunch of very strange decision making.
Charles Oliveira versus Justin Gaethje, which is a weird one on the list because normally people think of best fight as a longer, drawn out one, whereas this was just kind of a 1-round shootout.
But it's one of the greatest 1-round fights I've ever seen. It's insane.
Yeah, I think it might flat out be the best fight that's finished within a round that I've ever seen, because it finished kind of late into the first. Both guys get hurt multiple times. The guy that it's kind of a comeback because like Charles starts out really hot, then gets dinged and it looks like he's in a bad way, and then he comes back and like drops Gaethje really badly. And the second the fight hits the ground, everyone's losing their shit, but also it's like a foregone conclusion because it's like, oh well, Charles just hurt Gaethje and he's on his back. The fight's over.
Yeah, gorgeous finishing sequence as well. He just MMA'd the shit out of Justin Gaethje with the like right hand off of the clinch break into the finishing sequence on the ground, where he just hits everything that you can hit from the back. Hits the arm bar and the inverted triangle and elbows from that position. Just fantastic stuff. Victor Henry versus Raoni Barcelos.
Yeah, that one's up there just because it's like just a nice volume war. Like they kind of just went hard at each other.
It's the kind of fight that you don't get in MMA that much, where I don't know, like both guys actually have pretty good defense and are extremely composed, but just keep going at each other. And the pace was just insane, and like Raoni Barcelos was the perfect kind of matchup for Victor Henry to really get to showcase his like volume pressure style against a fighter that was like anything but target practice and was always throwing back in a dangerous counter threat. So that was a great fight.
Yeah, the Gane versus Tai Tuivasa I feel like is hard to put there, but it's like definitely worth a mention just because the first couple rounds aren't crazy.
Yeah, it was a pretty silly banger, but it's kind of like they have some neutral kickboxing, and then Gane gets dinged, and then he's fine, and then Tai gets really badly hurt to the body, and then there's kind of like you know where the fight's going from there. But it was fun, Tai was still in there swinging back. Julian Erosa versus Steven Peterson, like one that I felt the need to throw in there when I was writing the list, just because I felt like it was just like a fun undercard banger that was going to go under the radar because the fighters aren't that noticeable, and it was just like it's just on a fight night early in the year, and I think it actually ended up on the UFC's fights of the year list. But again, Julian Erosa, if he doesn't get sparked out in the first round, is always going to be in a banger.
Daniel Santos versus John Castaneda, just both guys get dropped and like hurt. It's like kind of hard not to put that type of fight there. It's also like a fun comeback.
Yeah, we got the tiny Charles Oliveira. John Castaneda was doing great, like piecing Santos up with southpaw head kicks for a good bit of the first round before Santos kind of just like figured out the one switch up that Castaneda had built his game plan around and just like walked him down and blasted him with knees on the cage. I don't know why I put Ji-Yeon Kim versus Priscilla Cachoeira on here, but it was a banger.
It was a good fight. Yan versus Sean O'Malley, also a good one, but just kind of strange, and probably would be on most people's like short list if it wasn't for the decision being kind of fucky.
Yeah, people like were so mad about the decision.
They disregard that the fight was great.
Yeah, it was a great fight. Nobody but Sean O'Malley's most insipid fanboys expected him to do even that well. And I was genuinely impressed. I guess it's kind of like has a bunch of questionable decision making from Piotr Yan that makes it kind of like, why did you even have to have this fight with this guy? But just a great back and forth war where both guys get hurt multiple times and all of MMA happens. But my actual pick for fight of the year is Drew Dober versus Bobby Green.
That's entirely fair. I think mine might be Robbie Lawler versus Brian Barberena.
Okay, that's fair. That didn't even occur to me.
It was just like two old dudes just going the fuck at it. Also, Renato Moicano versus RDA is up there just because it was kind of like Moicano defending himself, and then
I got that on a couple of other lists. But getting to see old Robbie Lawler for a round. Well, I think we kind of got to see both Robbie and Brian Barberena classic like come out, and like those two be able to have the kind of fight at this point where they were able to bring that out of each other. It was fun.
Yeah, and at least for me, the fight didn't last so long that it became sad.
Yeah. But Drew Dober versus, I mean, because like last year I was one of the dorks being like, oh, obviously fight of the year was Bobby Green versus Rafa. It was so cool, and they do so many cool tactical things. This is like if that fight had a disgusting knockout in the second round, and I mean if Bobby Green, I mean he looked magnificent in that first round, just lighting Dober up with intercepting counters and kicking the shit out of him, doing all of his lovely defense shit that worked until it didn't. Yeah, I love that fight.
Yeah, and it was a nice show of sportsmanship too, as well. Because Bobby Green gets knocked completely dead, and then he stands up 8 seconds later and is fine. And then Drew Dober's like, "Hey, everyone should be more like this guy. He's a cool guy."
Yeah, Bobby Green's just like, "Man, I got knocked out. That shit was crazy."
Like he just has the most generic, like polite reaction to being knocked out anyone's ever had. Bobby Green's a good sport.
Yeah, so I had a couple of other fights that I just wanted to mention that were not in the UFC and also not even actually MMA fights, but they were in one championship and it all just kind of blurs together. And also, it's impossible to follow fucking Japanese kickboxing. I don't even know where to start. Fucking ask Spencer for that stuff. But Sitachai versus Chingiz Alazov was just like an incredible technical war, and like Chingiz Alazov being able to take the kind of fight to Sitachai that most people just aren't able to, and Sitachai being the kind of a really crisp, clean technician who, if you can bring that fight to him, he will just fight you back and he will just have exchanges and eat shit and bang with you. And that was a great fight. Also, Tamanchai versus Pech Morakot was cool. It was another one where a lot of people kind of thought Tamanchai fought like a dumbass and made the fight a lot harder than it needed to be, even though he won. And just kind of decided to just sling left hands in the pocket with Pech Morakot. But even despite that, it's just like, I like seeing two guys who have really good defense have like a banger where they're both just trying to take each other's heads off, but it's really fucking hard for them to actually land clean on each other, and they've just got to do so much to set up clean offense. Another cool one recently was Pampayak versus Superlek. I think it was their 8th fight, and it was just cool to see a fight between two guys who like know each other that well at this point. It's a dorky technical fight where like you get to appreciate cool aesthetic defense, and part of the beauty of the fight actually being two guys like struggling to set up clean offense on each other. So those fights were cool, and I don't think we got much of a chance to talk about them, and they're worth going back and watching if you missed them.
Yeah, and then for best knockout, which is a category that had quite a lot of options this year. Also, probably some ones that we forgot to mention.
Yeah, definitely. Because, like, so many knockouts happened, and there's so many like ways that you can define a knockout of the year, be that on just like aesthetics or significance or context, or it being a particularly silly technique or sequence or what have you.
Just how knocked out someone gets.
Yeah, but I like to think, Christian, that we have a particular eye for knockouts. I even devised a scoring system at one point for, like, you know how Ed has his Ed scale? I have a similar thing, but for rating how cool knockouts are. I'm not going to get too into it, but if you're interested, you can ask me about that.
Yeah, so for this year, there's like options that we'll explain why they're on here, because some of them don't necessarily make sense. Like the fact that Molly McCann's on here for 2 fights at once.
Yeah, and also the first fight that I put on is on the list is Irene Aldana versus Macy Chiasson, because I've never seen someone get finished like that way, and it was cool.
Yeah, it's like a niche
axe kick to the liver from guard. So, I couldn't not mention it because you don't see that shit every day. But as for I guess the actual knockouts of the year, Demetrius Johnson in his second fight with Adriano Moraes, just one of the coolest flying knees that you'll ever see. And one of the things that I think makes us really appreciate a knockout is like sequencing. a lot of knockouts in MMA are just like a guy, two guys are at range and a guy throws a thing and then the other guy reads it wrong and just dies instantly. But then, when you see some shit like this where DJ does like simultaneously shifts and slips a left hook to set up a right overhand, and then as Adriano Moraes goes stumbling back, he like perfectly follows him back to the cage and fucking pins his head to the cage with a flying knee, and like before Adriano Moraes is even done like being dead, like DJ's just like jogging off like, yep. So that was one of the coolest fucking knockouts I've ever seen.
Yeah, DJ has a particular talent for making his finishes look like he slowed the world down in his perspective, and then we get to see it in real time. Because like he had that for the submission against Ray Borg, and then he had it for the KO against Bryce here. It was just so flawless looking.
Still, at the age that he is, he makes MMA look like a fucking video game. It's crazy.
Then we have Leon Usman, which is hard not to at least put in the top 5, just because it was a pound for pound top guy getting killed horribly, like getting full on like flattened.
That's one that you have to put because of context and just because of how savage the knockout was. Because, Usman being as good as undefeated and being a dominant champ that nobody really saw losing anytime soon, just getting absolutely murderized by a perfect left high kick. But as I said, it is kind of one of the least cool kinds of knockout in that it's just like, he threw the head kick and he thought it was a body kick and he died.
Yeah, you also have to read that fight as, like, you have to reach so hard to find that finish being, like, that interesting. Because it's really just, Usman, if you throw enough head kicks at him, he'll get hit by one. Most people just can't defend the wrestling long enough to throw that many head kicks against him. And Leon didn't even do it, really. It was just kind of like Usman took his eye off the ball and then got head kicked. Which, not to discredit the win, like, it's still a sick win. And it was also a great KO. But
also
just
Usman
like,
has been hurt by everyone he's fought who can do a southpaw double attack.
Yeah, like, it just wasn't, like... It's impressive because it like, got him the win, but it's not that impressive in the sense that, like, you just do that enough, you're going to get the win.
But it was also
like, up
fucking
to the numbers.
bananas because, like, Leon Edwards, not a historical finisher, and Kamaru Usman, extremely durable and has great recovery, and was up on the cards. And, it was one where, like, even though people always like to be like, anything can happen, when you're seeing a guy who hasn't had a knockout in however many years, you're not thinking that. And then he just does it, and you're like, what the fuck? So, have to include that one. Another great head kick knockout, Chito Vera versus Dominic Cruz. Just disgusting. Like, he'd been dinging Cruz up real bad throughout the fight, but just, I think, was it third, fourth round? He just gets Cruz to the cage, throws a jab, and gets Cruz doing, like, one of his big exaggerated dips as he turns away and just kicks him in the nose and activates his ragdoll physics. Brutal knockout.
Yeah, the fact that he just like adjusted instead of doing a full on 1-2 into a head kick, he just like flicks the jab and then like steps into it. Like, he actually adjusted to it quite well, and the rest of the fight also kind of adds to the knockout for me because he pretty much landed like 3 good strikes the entire fight, and they all either got a knockdown or ended the fight.
Which, I don't know why people think that's a stupid way to fight. I think it's badass.
Yeah. If I could only win by doing that, I would totally do that. Like, just throw the most efficient shot selection possible and just win. Then we got Molly McCann versus Luana Carolina and Hannah Goldie. This is in here.
You had to give Molly McCann style points for getting 2 spinning elbow KOs.
Yeah.
Also being someone who's, like, not known for getting finishes. And, I mean, again, the Luana Carolina one was a disgusting knockout where Carolina was just like starfished out cold. And then I actually thought the Hannah Goldie one was kind of cooler because, again, like, she didn't get like instantly flatlined. She just got froze up against the cage, and Molly McCann had to like polish her off with some nice punches up against the cage. Again, got to see some cool sequencing. And then on the same card as, I believe, the Luana Carolina one, Ilia Topuria versus Jai Herbert. Absolutely sickening the way Topuria lifted Jai Herbert into the air with a left hook to the body and then just cleaned him out with a right hand that sent him absolutely into the shadow realm.
Yeah, it was like so filthy that you kind of gotta disregard the fact that the level of competition, it's not bad at all, but it's not like a champion getting knocked out.
Yeah, well, and like, you know, Jai Herbert had dropped Topuria with a head kick in the first round.
Yeah, he's a good fighter. It's just hard to not like discount it from being like the knockout of the year just because it's not against like a champion or in like the Demetrius Johnson fight. Like, even though he wasn't UFC champion, he's still a great fighter.
Yeah, and had knocked out Demetrius Johnson in their previous match.
Yeah, like a very, very good fighter. So it's just kind of a strange one where I don't really know how to rate it in terms of picking it, but on actual like KO visuals, it's maybe the best looking knockout on the entire list.
But then there was Tyson Nam versus Ode Osborne, which again, not that noticeable, but it's one that I just personally had to throw in there because it was just like, it was so silly. Like the way Tyson Nam like pull countered a flying knee and then decked Osborne with a right hand and then like sent him rolling back into just like the boopiest little ground and pound. Like, there's no way that I can describe this knockout. You just got to go watch it now if you haven't seen it.
Yeah, it was just very funny. Then we have Adrian Yanez versus Tony Kelly, where Adrian just they have like a kind of scrappy brawl for the first round, but it's not really competitive. And then Yanez takes over and lands a really nice series of shots. He just lands so many punches that he just like stuns him and then just keeps him stun locked, kind of.
Yeah, and it was a fun one to see because Tony Kelly is a fucking asshole and B, extremely tough. So he like just like had to let Adrian Yanez keep doing shot selection on him and just following him around, cleaning him out with right hands over and over again. And then the moment where he drops him and then like Adrian Yanez like disappears and then reappears behind Tony Kelly to hit him with a bunch of left hooks from behind. And then the ref like trips over Tony Kelly, getting Adrian Yanez off. And then Adrian Yanez flips him off.
Yeah, the flicking him off.
That was a good one.
That's the like main thing that seals it there.
Also put Alex Pereira versus Sean Strickland just because, like, I mean, just because it was cool.
And like you said, sequencing is big for us. And like he drops him really nice off of something slick and then follows up with a right hand that finishes him off.
Yeah, that is just like timed and placed so perfectly as Sean Strickland's trying to recover and he hasn't regained his balance yet. And Sean Strickland is just like way harder to knock out than he should be. So it's cool to see a kickboxer just come over and just do like two tactics and just win easily.
Yeah, and then Gregory Rodriguez versus Julian Marquez, where Rodriguez really just puts on a masterclass for like a round and a half of looking like he can't be hit. He out of nowhere puts on like the best defensive boxing performance of the year.
And then also we had to include Bilal Muhammad versus Sean Brady because it was just like it just makes the least sense out of any knockout on this list.
Yeah, in a weird way it makes sense, but it also doesn't make sense because like if someone told me that Bilal Muhammad would easily beat Sean Brady and maybe even hurt him a bunch, I would be like, yeah, fair. But he has just not traditionally been someone that can follow up to get finishes like that before.
No, and it's a fight that I like because it proves that like anyone can become a finisher. Like it is about like mentality and approach.
Yeah, really all he needed was someone to be like, hey dude, just fucking go harder in his corner. Like just push it. Just try. You can finish the guy. Have the confidence.
I think we said this at the time. Like during that sequence, Khabib was just screaming, "Finish him!" And that was like exactly the corner advice that Bilal Muhammad needs.
Yeah, so many coaches will be like, "Oh, don't overexert. Don't go crazy. Don't go crazy," which is terrible fucking advice if you are a stamina threat like that also has a crazy chin and you've hurt someone. Like, just go at him.
And like and you can see that the guy doesn't have anything for you off of the back foot, and he's gassing, and like it was what Bilal Muhammad needed to hear, was to just keep throwing 1-2s over and over again.
My actual pick for the year is DJ Moraes, because like how is it not?
I think I agree.
I feel like if I had to say two others that I think are there, it's Cheeto Cruz and Tapuria Herbert, just because Tapuria Herbert is so like filthy of a KO, and then kind of the same for Cheeto Cruz, but Cheeto Cruz is just like very like nicely set up.
Yeah, it's just kind of a cooler head kick knockout than Leon Edwards versus Kamaru Usman. Okay, so we're getting into best submission. So I had to throw in there, of course, Islam Makhachev, club and subbing the leader in finishes and submissions in Charles Oliveira to gain the lightweight title. I was kind of salty about it, but it was an absolutely magnificent performance. And he hurt Charles Oliveira and then just did a nice arm triangle. It was like in a vacuum. There's nothing crazy. Again, it's just the context of it. It's not like he's the first guy to submit Charles Oliveira or anything. Whatever.
Yeah, as like Charles Oliveira's biggest fan, I wasn't actually like that sour about the fight. I was like, oh, cool. Someone looked good enough to actually beat Charles Oliveira. That's fucking nuts. Because Charles Oliveira is so good. Like, being able to beat him is such an accomplishment. So it's a weird one where I kind of want to give that one best submission of the year just off of how much of an accomplishment it is. But it's also hard to do because, like, he does club and sub him, and it's not like Charles hasn't been submitted before. But also, like, how hard someone is to submit doesn't factor in that much for me when it comes to best submission.
Yeah, that's fair, because we also have Charles Oliveira versus Justin Gaethje.
Yeah, where if you can get on Gaethje's back, you're probably going to be able to submit him if you're a decent level jiu-jitsu guy.
It's not easy to get there, but still one that we had to throw in, because it was still in a title fight, and as I was talking about earlier, just gorgeous sequencing once it hits the ground.
Yeah, it was just slick as hell. It's hard not to put on there.
Then we also have one of my favorites, Said Nurmagomedov. I've got versus Cody Stamann, but you could also, again, you can throw in him hitting essentially the same move on Saityakub Kakramanov. I just thought, again, the way he sets up the submission against Cody Stamann, with like they're in the clinch and Nurmagomedov just hits this nice little inside trip that gets Stamann to like take a bad shot from his knees, and he just instantly rolls him over into a ninja choke. And Cody Stamann definitely, like, I think a solid level of opposition to do that kind of thing too. And Saityakub Kakramanov, just like pressure wrestled the shit out of Said Nurmagomedov until Nurmagomedov just like found a guillotine, because even though he was getting wrestled, like Nurmagomedov is just a really tricky scrambler who it's really fucking hard to like actually get him in control positions, and he was doing really smart shit about like shutting down transitions to the back at the first layer. So yeah, nice stuff. Alexei Oleinik versus Jared Vanderer fucking had to be on here because it was just some of the silliest shit I've ever seen.
Yeah, he gives Vanderer multiple advantageous positions, or quote-unquote advantageous positions, just so that he can eventually reverse it and submit him.
He like gives his back, and then literally he puts himself in a triangle, in like an invert or a reverse triangle with it, whichever the fuck one it is. Like literally takes Jared Vanderer's legs and puts them in that position, and then just rolls over into Vanderer's guard and just glides through his guard into side control, where he finishes him with the mother's milk.
And then Jessica Andrade versus Amanda Lemos. This is just on there because it's fucking sick. Like, it was in a main event fight, and Andrade just walks over and fucking grabs her and then strangles her while they're standing up. It wasn't even like that high skill of a maneuver. It's kind of just her athleting her opponent. But either way, it's so badass. Like, Lemos is an athlete too, like a great athlete.
To one of the other more imposing athletes in the division, and just come here, stupid, and just squeezed her.
Yeah, it's like if Yoel Romero went over and just like arm triangled fucking like Chris Weidman on the feet. Like, matchup wise, not the same, but like someone's also a great athlete.
Yeah, I know what you mean. I wanted to throw in Jim Miller versus Donald Cerrone, because I mean, what a year it's been for Jim Miller. And it was the first time I've ever seen like a reverse club and sub where Jim Miller got hurt by a head kick, but Donald Cerrone fell over, and Jim Miller like recovered quick enough to just like wrap up the ghillie while Donald Cerrone was getting to his feet. So that was cool.
Yeah, and Paul Craig versus Nikita Krylov also in contest for least surprising submission of all time. Paul Craig gets like put on his back, and then he's like, "Oh no, I'm on my back. Whatever will I do?" And then Nikki Thrills gets fucking submitted because like Nikki just goes too aggressively on top.
Yeah, just because like the whole time the commentary booth are just like, you know, Paul Craig, he probably really needs to just try and work to his feet. I get that this is his style. He's a jiu-jitsu guy, but you're not winning a round like this. And then just like wraps up the nicest triangle you'll ever see. Yeah, like Nikki Krill's just like overextending a little too much on trying to get some big ground and pound. Paul Craig just like traps the arm and instantly wraps up the triangle. There's like nice old school street self-defense jiu-jitsu shit you're not going to see in MMA outside of Paul Craig versus Nikita Krylov fight. And it's also added to how cool it was that Paul Craig, when he was pulling Nikita Krylov's head down to finish the choke, he just started talking to him. He was just like saying, "You're fucked, brother. You fucked up. You might as well tap now." Also, I put Charles Jourdain versus Lando Fernata on here just because it was a guillotine finish where, as Charles Jourdain recovered guard to like get leverage to finish the choke, he just pulled Venata's pants down with his legs, so he just got submitted and pantsed.
Yeah, that one being funny makes it actually in my top 3. Just because it's funny, and also Lando Venata is a really good wrestler, so him being submitted a weight class down by a guy not traditionally known for submissions makes it up there for me. But I think my actual...
Also, I feel less bad about picking a submission based on it being funny, because, like, you know, nobody really got hurt.
Yeah, I think my actual pick for this category isn't even picking best submission, it's picking best submitter. And it's going to be Said Nurmagomedov because he's got 2 ninja chokes in a year, and that's my favorite submission.
Yeah, I mean, I was going to pick the Cody Stamann one anyway, just because of how nice the setup is, and because that, like I say, that is good. Like, that's a decent level of opposition to pull off that kind of move on. Like, the only other person who submitted Cody Stamann was Aljamain Sterling, and it was like a reasonably competitive grappling match leading up to that. But yeah, also doing it against a somewhat unheralded but definitely very good opponent in Saidi Kukramanov as well, I think seals that one for this category.
Then on to best performance.
Yeah, so there's like one fight that it obviously is, and then there's another fight that it maybe might be, and then there's a few other fights that I wanted to throw in there just because of like different reasons. So like, I mean, it's obviously Alexander Volkanovski versus Max Holloway 3, right?
Yeah, it was the like second best fighter in the world getting 50-45 by the best fighter in the world. So
he made Max Holloway look like the Korean Zombie.
Yeah, it's hard.
It takes some sting off of that Korean Zombie fight, because it's like oh, maybe Korean Zombie wasn't even that done in that fight and looked bad. Like, Volk is just this fucking good.
Yeah, he's literally just that good. But then I feel like picking that's just cheating, so then we have to list the other ones.
Yeah, so I threw in like a couple I wanted to throw in were Calvin Kattar versus Giga Chikadze, mainly just because like it seemed like a horrible matchup, and Calvin Kattar was coming off of the worst shit kicking of all time to Max Holloway, and he's not young, and people thought he might just be done, and he just showed up and like 50-44 beat the absolute piss out of a decent fighter who's not easy to do that to. Also, Robert Whittaker versus Marvin Vettori, kind of a little bit of a stylistic layup, but just like nobody's really done that to Marvin Vettori. No one's like just, you know, he even got some stuff done against Adesanya to the point that Marvin Vettori could somehow convince himself that he had an argument for winning either or both of those fights. But this was the only fight where like Bobby Knuckles genuinely broke Marvin Vettori to the point that he was like, okay, that guy was just better than me. I couldn't do anything. And I thought that was quite impressive.
Yeah, and then we got Islam Makhachev versus Charles Oliveira, which is hard to not put as number one if you discount or if you don't pick Volk Max Holloway, just because it's a pound for pound top 5 guy getting consummately like beaten like very easily. Not easily. Yeah, like, he made Charles look bad. Charles is one of the best fighters in the world right now, and he made him look bad. Yeah, it was like Charles Oliveira kind of having his getting dog walked stage of his late action fighter career, or like the first fight that's really happened in. Like he just kind of got dog walked because he was like chasing shit that wasn't there because he was just like stuck on certain ideas too long. And Makhachev really capitalized on every like perceived flaw you could find in Charles' game, like the fact that he's pretty hittable, the fact that he jumps into a lot of things and doesn't really like he just throws caution to the wind so much that if you fight someone that's that controlled but also able to implement that type of controlled game without getting scared, like Justin Gaethje couldn't probably be that controlled on the feet if he doesn't have to worry about getting submitted. Or Dustin Poirier, kind of the same thing. Like, if he's not worrying about getting fucked up and submitted, then you can do it. And Islam, it's just surprising in the sense that you wouldn't have, prior to watching that fight, expected that Makhachev would be able to just easily beat Charles Oliveira on the feet. Despite the fact that Islam's very good, I think that just stylistically, he's really rough for Charles, and also he prepared perfectly, and he implemented his game plan as well as you possibly could in that matchup. So that's like the pick, I think. But it's let's just not use Volk or Volk Max or that fight. Yeah, let's not use either of those fights as like the best performance of the year because it's just boring. Because like no shit. Yeah, here's the one I want to pick: Anthony Hernandez versus Marc-Andre Barrio, just because it's funny as fuck that one of the best displays of MMA you'll see happened in a fight that's like somewhat considered to be low level. Like Marc-Andre Barrio is not by the masses considered like a great opponent, but he is a good fighter. And Anthony Hernandez did everything you can do in MMA to him. He outstruck him, he out grappled him, he out kicked him, he out clinched him. He really fucked him up in the clinch at certain points. He
pressure wrestled and broke the shit out of Barrio on the ground.
Yeah, he out jiu-jitsu'd him. Like he beat him in every phase of fighting, which I think is
like
ground.
Prime Frankie Edgar, but at middleweight.
Yeah, with a better clinch game. It's hard not for me to think of best performance as what shows the most MMA that you can possibly do. Like he showed like every phase of MMA being done really well against a decent opponent who's also like defensively competent in every one of those areas. So that's my pick. But then best performance in the sense of like someone getting just beaten the fucking shit out of. We got Spurrier versus Bryce Mitchell.
A fight that wasn't as easy to call as maybe we would have liked it to be for guys who enjoy Ilia Topuria. But then it looked like it shouldn't have been, like it looked like it should have been an easy pick, and that Bryce Mitchell like didn't really belong in there, even though he's clearly a very good fighter, and like in theory had a lot of things that could have been really tricky for Topuria, and it was almost a flawless performance. Like if there's anything you can criticize, it's that Topuria was just like kind of overswinging because he wanted to take Bryce's head off, but he consummately outgrappled him, pressured the shit out of him, countered the shit out of him, and then finished him on the ground with just an incredibly disrespectful sequence where he just pancaked him into an arm triangle. And then, I guess on a similar kind of theme, but a different category, we've got best shit kicking.
Yeah, there was some good shit kickings this year, but it's hard to not think that like Valkyrian Zombie is just like the best one.
Yeah, Volk gets all of the awards because he's the best fighter, obviously.
Yeah, you can give him like Fighter of the Year too. Like you can give him basically anything of the year except for finish. But even then, it was like a sick KO. Like, you could arguably put that in the top finishes. It was really like if the ref decided to let Korean Zombie die, it would have been the best knockout of the year.
Yeah. Oh, well, I mean, you can also consider the whole fight the best knockout of the year.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, he made the Korean Zombie look like he didn't belong in the UFC, which even for the Korean Zombie at this point, I still think Korean Zombie could win a bunch of fights at featherweight if he cared to at this point. And Volt just put him in a box. Joaquin Buckley versus Albert Duraev was just a ridiculous athletic mismatch where Joaquin Buckley's like just pure martial arts vibes, incredibly jacked guy thing was able to just work, and I spent half the fight being really mad at him for not having a clue what he was doing, and the rest of the fight just enjoying the ride.
I feel like Sergey Spivak Greg Hardy is one that you can put on just because it's kind of funny that the like asshole Greg Hardy got the fuck beaten out of him.
Oh yeah, he just got like completely outclassed and just thrown around like a child and instantly destroyed on the ground, and then like was like pretending that he got knocked out harder than he did to like for like damage control. I don't know, that one was weird, but it was funny. Matt Frivola versus Genaro Valdez, kind of hard not to put on there just because Genaro Valdez gets dropped like 5 times.
Yeah, it was pretty brutal. And then Sarukian versus Joel Alvarez, that one's pretty good.
Yeah, mostly an ass whooping on the ground.
Not normally what people factor in for shit kickings of the year.
No, and it was just fun to see like a massive weight bully who does not belong in the division just get like taken down and elbowed the shit out of by like the 5'7" like stocky guy.
Yeah, and then we got RDA versus Moicano, where it was just a kind of level difference the entire fight.
So short notice and just like a horrible stylistic matchup for Hanato Moicano on any night, but just a brutal fight that should have been stopped at several points, and you got to see all of the stuff that RDA does and that he's still got it. He jabbed up Moicano, dropped him with a head kick, beat the fuck out of him on the ground.
Yeah, I think that fight isn't best shit kicking or like even really close to that, but I think it is maybe the best showing in a fight where you get the fuck beaten out of you. Or like the best effort in a losing, like a hard losing performance that I've seen of the year.
Yeah, because Moicano was still in that fight. I guess I can see why they kept him in it, but wasn't anywhere near close to winning at any point. And RDA like, I feel like he's thought of as just like very workmanlike and consistent, but if his game is working, he is extremely violent. And then Khalil Roundtree versus Carl Roberson was just a bitching. Like, yeah, Khalil Roundtree just came out and just pressured the fuck out of Carl Roberson and just pushed him up against the cage and just beat him up for everything that he wanted to try to do. And then when he dropped him in the second round, we got to see the return of the Khalil Roundtree switch kick to the body of a grounded opponent. One of my personal favorite techniques.
Yeah, I think my pick it's hard because I don't really like many of the options, like as a like personally. But Valkyrian Zombie, I guess, just the easy one because it's like the kind of the highest level guy getting the fuck beaten out of him. Even
okay, so they're not on like a similar theme, but like slightly different. Is best mismatch, which similar, but also gets into the realm of shady promotional practice, which is a huge part of MMA. All of the ones that I've got here are in the UFC. I feel like there must have been some silly, horrible mismatches in like one championship and stuff like that at some point this year. But so we got Alex Pereira versus Sean Strickland,
where it's a weird one where it's not even a mismatch depending on how you look at it, but if you look at it for the way that it played out and the way that we had kind of every reason to believe it would play out, it was a mismatch.
Well, and just like the reasons that the fight was booked for as well, because on one hand, you could say, well, Sean Strickland is an experienced, like, well-ranked MMA fighter, and, Pereira wasn't really either of those things going into that fight. But it's like, yeah, but it's also like a janky MMA striker who will not impose a wrestling threat against a huge and extremely dangerous and technically proficient actual world championship level kickboxer. So it was just so obviously made. Even Sean Strickland knew that this fight was made just to get Pereira a knockout that was going to vault him into a title shot.
Yeah, I think that the fights like largely a mismatch, just in part. There was like not even a path to victory for Strickland, even if you look at him being able to wrestle. Like, they were trying to get him knocked out because it's a guy he's also like much smaller than Pereira. Like, kind of everything about the matchup. Like, even if it was a matchup where he would have a skill edge in wrestling, which, I mean, he does, but he doesn't wrestle, and also he's too small to even really impose that type of thing against Pereira had he tried. And it's just nice being able to... It was like if we get to see, like, Bobby Green fight fucking Sidichai. If Sidichai had, like 2 years of grappling training.
Yeah, I mean, even though we love Bobby Green.
Yeah. I just use him as, like, an example of someone that's kind of like a sparring style guy. Yeah. And a 1-2 merchant. Well, like, this fight was a 1-2 merchant versus a legitimate kickboxer.
Yeah. And then I had to include Aljamain Sterling versus TJ Dillashaw, which on paper shouldn't be any kind of miss. Should just be like a well-booked championship fight. But once it became quite apparent that everyone involved was aware of TJ Dillashaw's horrible shoulder injury that basically instantly ended the fight, it really was like, what are we doing here? And I haven't reached for some of the wacky conspiracy theories that I've heard thrown out about this fight, because I genuinely do believe that TJ Dillashaw is just that dumb and like just that much of a like grind set chud that he believed that he could beat Aljamain Sterling with one arm, but he obviously couldn't, and he got destroyed.
Yeah, it was just very annoying to watch. I don't really have anything good to say about the fight. Like, that one wasn't even like a funny mismatch. It was disappointing because I wanted to see a well-matched fight, and it started out looking cool for a minute.
It should have been a great bantamweight title fight, and it just seemed like a waste of pretty much everyone's time involved, other than maybe Aljamain Sterling's, because he got an easy win and he got paid, but it still doesn't really do anything for his championship reign.
And his shoulder got popped out, doing something that isn't even like something that pops your shoulder out traditionally. They were just saying his shoulder popped out and like sneezing too hard pretty much by the end of the camp because of how fucked up it was throughout, and the fact that he kept training with it.
Yeah, which is why it is completely insane that he was even in this fight in the first place, and then he had to retire.
Like, I'm sure he was getting fucked up in sparring by like bad fighters because of how bad the injury.
Yeah, it was just the first time he had to apply any pressure to his arm; it just fell off.
Yeah, it wasn't. Didn't he injure his shoulder doing like trying to limp leg?
Yeah, maybe.
or like he was just trying to like move his leg out of the way when he got grabbed, and then somehow his shoulder popped out. I don't really like. He had a very compromised shoulder. That fight shouldn't have even been booked. But I don't think that's what I would count traditionally in the sense of what a mismatch is. I think the next two, however...
Yeah, and you've got two sides of the same mismatch coin here, where you've got Jack Della Maddalena, who, to be fair, was making his UFC debut and was supposed to be debuting against Wally Alves because it was clear from his Contender Series fight that he was going to be one of the most high-quality prospects at welterweight moving forward. And booking him against Wally Alves as a debut, that's not an easy fight for a debuting fighter. But then Wally Alves pulled out and they brought in 4-0 Pete Rodriguez, who is an actual MMA fighter, at least, but yeah, with four fights and pretty much all being like first round finishes, it was clear that the guy was dangerous, but not ready to be there, and definitely not against a guy who actually had a reasonable amount of outside UFC experience and clearly was a complete and athletic and well put together fighter. And he got knocked out in the first round, obviously.
Yeah, and then in the reverse, where Pete Rodriguez, a guy who is a genuine MMA fighter, like he's been training for years, he has a good amount of experience.
I think he has amateur fights as well.
Yeah,
outside of his now 6 professional fights.
Yeah, like he's just a competent guy who's very clearly athletic enough to be a good fighter, or to be like an upper echelon finisher.
Yeah, well, and as you can see, he is dangerous.
And, yeah,
he was fighting Mike Jackson.
Yeah, he fought a guy who was functionally a journalist in the last several years, who has never really been a dedicated, serious fighter. It was a guy the difference between a serious fighter and an unserious fighter was demonstrated in the fight. I feel like this is more of a mismatch than Jack Della Maddalena versus Peter Rodriguez by like a fucking huge margin, because at least that's two serious fighters just at different stages of their career.
Yeah, this is like this is like a hobbyist. And
a guy who just like fucks around and has been training for a long time.
Yeah, he got fucking obliterated. And then the last one I've got on here is just a Sam Alvey versus UFC fighters.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Sam Alvey should not have been fighting UFC fighters for the last 3 years.
Yeah, and then they had him in there with fucking Brendan Allen and Mikhail Alexeychik.
Just predatory matchmaking. But I think my pick for best mismatch is just Pete Rodriguez's two sides of the same coin.
Yeah,
just because it's funny. It's rare that a fighter is able to be on both sides of a mismatch in the same year.
Okay, so moving on to best comeback. Once again, Leon Edwards versus Kamaru Usman had to be in here because was definitely losing, and like we said earlier, it being a title fight and Kamaru Usman having been such a dominant champion and Leon not being a finisher. But I think compared to some of the other comebacks, it was very it really did just happen very suddenly. He did stuff tactically to set it up, and he had been getting stuff done throughout the fight. Even beyond the first round where he took Usman down and got his back. He just kept getting himself put on the cage and hit in the body and taken down a bunch. And then Usman kind of just takes his eye off the ball because he thinks he's got the fight in the bag, and Leon kicks him in the head once and he dies. Whereas the other ones on this list all involve the person who has a bad start having to do things to really work their way back into the fight beyond a single moment.
Yeah, and something I alluded to for the Leon Edwards Usman fight earlier is that if you want to reach really hard, you can come up with the idea, maybe Leon actually set up the KO because he had been giving up pressure just for free, not even really getting pressured, more just walking backwards for 4 rounds. And then all of a sudden he stops just moving backwards and stands his ground even a little, and Usman just kind of accepts it because he is just conditioned to by that point. And then he head kicks him at range. But I feel like that's a really big fucking reach, even if it's true or a little true. It also doesn't count.
I think it's kind of tactically part of the dynamic, but I think it's a lot more that Usman.
I don't think it was conscious at all.
No. I think he just gassed and he thought he had the fight in the bag and thought he could just chill at range with Leon for the 5th round, and that was just obviously not the thing to do. But he put out a ridiculous work rate, and they were at high altitude, and Leon had kind of just been chilling, he was losing, but he wasn't
injured actually, or anything.
No, and he wasn't doing it was the rare kind of Kamaru Usman fight where his grinder approach of I'm going to do stuff all the time and it's going to tire me out, but it's going to tire the other guy out, kind of just didn't work because Leon's also quite large and strong and just chilled for several rounds and didn't do too much.
Yeah, it is also though hard to give it like best comeback when he had the best first round anyone's had against Usman.
Yeah. So
Like
I said,
he got his first takedown that Usman's received against him
straight into mount and then takes the back and had a body triangle secured.
Yeah, so it's kind of like he was winning very clearly, and then Usman came back and was like, okay, yeah, no, fuck this, for 3 rounds, and then in the 4th round, Leon like came back. So even if he hadn't knocked him out, it still would have been like a 48-47 decision.
Yeah, whereas Matt Schnell versus Sumidajiri, like Matt Schnell was completely on the brink of death for the entire of the 2nd round. I think this fight, like the 2nd round of this fight, holds a special place to me as just like my like single round of MMA ever. Just because if I think it's if someone said to me, I've never seen MMA before, what is it? I'll just be like, oh dude, watch this. And you're just going to see like everything that can happen in an MMA fight in like 3 minutes, where like Sumidajiri is just cleaning Schnell out with like straight counters and like hand trap elbows and stuff, and then like takes his eye off the ball for like a moment, and Schnell like dings him with the right hand and takes him down, beats the fuck out of him from mount, and then gets rolled over and then finishes with a triangle. And you know, it has that moment where Schnell's letting go of Sumidajiri while he's completely limp and they're both covered in blood and it looks like a murder just happened.
Yeah, I feel like that fight is the most traditionally considered a comeback out of all the fights on the list, but isn't my favorite one. Like, I think it's a lot more violent than it is a good comeback. It's more just he got so fucking badly hurt that it seemed impossible for him to come back, which is also a criteria for comebacks.
But this is also, as you've mentioned, is a thing that will happen with Sumidajiri. But I mean, like, he still did everything he should have had to do, so, you know.
Yeah, and it not being a thing that Matt Schnell's typically known for makes it a little different as well, because that kind of undercuts the fact that it's not something that happens, or something that can happen to Sumidajiri.
Sexyama versus Shinya Aoki is on here, I mean, just because it's funny and it's ridiculous that, like, that fight happened in 2022.
And it was like a good fight.
Yeah. And it was like, you know, Shinya got a standing body triangle early and was just like, oh, it's going to be early Shinya Aoki submission, whatever. But then Sexy Alma was just like fine and just chilled with Shinya Aoki on his back. And then Shinya gassed his legs out and Sexy Alma beat the fuck out of him in the 2nd round. And Shinya Aoki really didn't want to give into it. Like he did, he just really didn't want to go out because he seemed to actually have legitimate beef with Sexy Armor. So I mean, yeah, Sexy Armor just really had to go for it. It was cool. I lost my fucking mind watching that fight.
Yeah, Chris Barnett versus Jake Collier. That fight is just very inspirational. Like, the context in the personal life of Chris Barnett makes it a lot crazier as well. And the fact that people were just thinking, oh, Jake Collier is like a decent-ish prospect going against a guy who's kind of like a meme, just for being the guy who seems like he wouldn't be the type of guy that can just do a fucking, like, a wheel kick athletically, and then he does, because there's a weird thing where people think that he is a guy that is a heavyweight just because he eats poorly and doesn't, like, work out well. Nah, he's just a heavy guy. Like, you look at the difference between him and Jake Collier. Jake Collier is a middleweight who is just out of shape and gained a lot of weight through that and then just decided to fight during it. Whereas Chris Barnett is genuinely just a large dude who happens to be kind of short.
Yeah, he's incredibly thick and dense, but like, yeah, he's actually athletic, and I'm sure like underneath the fat, he's just jacked. he's got like a strong man body. Yeah,
it's just a nice fight from like an optics standpoint. It was a crazy war. Barnett had a passing very close to him before the fight pretty recently.
It had the kind of fight that you don't traditionally think of Chris Barnett as being capable of, and it had an amazing post-fight interview, like genuinely inspirational stuff. Like, Chris Barnett fucking rules. He's too good for the UFC.
Then my actual pick.
Yeah, I think maybe the actual pick is Dougie Da Silva de Andrade versus Sergey Morozov.
Yeah, it's just a fucking crazy war where it's not necessarily back and forth, but it kind of is, because it's not just an instant, oh shit, he fucking came back in one exchange then won the fight. He really built back into it, which I think for me is a key part of a true comeback, is someone building into it, not just it happening.
Yeah, and Douglas Da Silva was getting destroyed in the first round.
And like, he landed some attrition shots throughout there. Like, he got some body shots in. He showed that the overhand was there. But then
in the second round, he really just started putting the pressure on and investing in the body shots, hitting a ton of like hard left hook to the body into right straights, and was able to get the back and finish Morozov on the ground. And yeah, it was one where it looked like he was fucked in the first round, and he really had to dig deep and not just go out and fight, make tactical adjustments to a decent, well-rounded fighter.
Yeah, so that's my pick for best comeback. I think the other ones were a little bit too much. A guy just coming back in an exchange, or his opponent gassing really hard from their own winning. Whereas this was a pure, he made adjustments and like toughed out some really hard situations and then built his way back into the fight and then got a secure finish where he made it look like not just a comeback, he made it look like a replicable way for him to win.
Oh yeah, I also didn't include Alex Pereira versus Israel Adesanya just because like I just thought that was like a reasonably competitive fight throughout, where yeah, Pereira was down on the cards and he had to go out and really push the finish in the fifth round, but I mean that like just is a replicable way for him to win, and it was a possibility the whole time, and he had done good work throughout the fight, so I don't really think of that as being a comeback.
Yeah, like Adesanya said, his leg was cooked by that point in the fight. So
yeah, I mean, Adesanya said a lot of stuff.
Then for best prospect, not that many options, but we got some.
We got some. I wanted to throw this in here. It's not like we're watching a ton of regional stuff and we're looking out for people who are gonna be coming into the UFC. I didn't even watch the fucking Contender Series this year, but you know, some people who made UFC debuts this year who aren't ranked yet, but are clearly going to be meaningful players in their division for a long time. Tatsuro Taira, a Japanese flyweight prospect, he's just a really nice like back take specialist and counterpuncher.
Yeah, his game works very cohesively together in a way that's fun and interesting.
Yeah, and he's like very young, but is like has a reasonably complete game that works, but he can still build on. He's a good athlete, and he picked up 2 solid wins this year in a decision over Carlos Candelario, who is very experienced and well-rounded, and a armbar submission win over CJ Vergara, who is just really athletic and a good scrambler.
Way better wins than you would expect someone his age to be able to get at this point in his career.
Yeah, not easy fights to be your first 2 fights in the UFC at all.
And you gotta consider, Tatsuro Taira doesn't even have like man strength yet. He's like 22, 23. I'm not sure whether he hit 22 this year or hit 23 this year, but he's very young. You expect that he's the type of fighter who also has a style that's going to allow him to age well or age gracefully and just get better and better. So that's nice. Also, depending on what you constitute as a prospect, we could have Shavkat Rakhmonov on here.
Once you've beaten Neil Magny, you're not a prospect.
Well, I feel like just the fact that he's a guy that people expect to be really fucking good, whereas I feel like it's kind of innate to a prospect for someone to be a bit of an unknown and not like 7-0 in M1 before they come to the UFC for them to be a prospect.
Yeah.
Because like M1's good. If you're 7-0 in M1, you're fucking good.
Yeah, exactly. And yeah, like I say, a win over Neil Magny is like that's a Like you're a welterweight contender as far as I'm concerned. But for the future of welterweight, we have got Jack Della Maddalena, who we talked about earlier, who I'm sure, I'm almost certain his next fight is going to be a ranked one. If not, I'm sure he's going to be in ranked fights at some point in 2023. We were really impressed with him coming off his fight with Ong Lusa in the Contender Series, which I guess his recent performances have also given some context on Ong Lusa as an opponent who like hung in there for the whole fight and didn't give Jack Della Maddalena an easy fight at all. And it has been nothing but first round finishes this year against aforementioned Pete Rodriguez, who didn't really deserve to be in there, but as we said, is tough and dangerous. And then Ramzan Amiev, who has his problems, but is a tough, grindy grappler who fits the archetype of the couple of losses that Jack Della Maddalena sustained really early in his career and showed the kind of development that he's had to have to be where he's at now. And then he just went out there and fucking obliterated Danny Roberts.
Yeah, I feel like Maddalena has to be the pick just because he has 3 first-round finishes in a year.
Yeah, really impressive stuff.
Like, Rodriguez, Amiev, and Roberts, gradually better and better competition, and, like, none of them are bad fighters, and he finished them all fast as fuck. Oh, and he's fighting Randy Brown next.
Oh.
In February.
Okay, well, that's definitely a test. I guess we could throw in Raul Rosas Jr. just for being 13 years old and getting a nice submission, but
I don't think we can.
Like there's nothing outside of that context that really like screams this guy is the future of this division to me in the same way that I do think with the other people we got on this list. And the last one that I threw in was Natalia Silva. Maybe kind of out of nowhere, and yeah, it's women's flyweight, it's whatever, but I just think she's got a really cool style. I've really enjoyed both of the performances that she had this year. She had a win in her debut over Jasmine Jasudavicius, where she just looked like fucking vintage Edson Barboza, just like outmaneuvered and switch kicked the shit out of the girl, and looked really solid in scrambles as well. Was getting some nice trips, just comprehensive ass whooping, and then fought Teresa Bleda, who was also making her debut and wasn't quite as experienced, but was very large and athletic and grindy, and gave Natalia Silva everything she could handle in the first round, and actually forced Silva to show that she could deal with all phases of fighting and push through adversity. And then she knocked out Teresa Bleda with a fucking... It was like a spinning side kick to the face as Teresa Bleda was taking a bad shot. One of those things that looks kind of fluky when you see it, but I mean, Teresa Bleda had been shooting shitty low singles throughout the fight, and Natalia Silva had kind of just been using the spinning side kick as like a one size fits all intercepting counter. So that'll happen. I think it's kind of like the Aljamain Sterling versus Marlon Moraes kind of thing. But yeah, 2 really good wins, and she's got a fun style, and she's a good athlete, and I think she's going to be doing good stuff at women's flyweight.
Yeah, an honorable mention is Casey O'Neill. If she had just fought more this last year, then
that's fair as well. But at least picked up one genuinely very solid win over Roxanne Manaferi, who it was her retirement fight, and she has had plenty of losses throughout her career, but still just a crafty, well-rounded veteran who showed against Macy Barber, you can't just be large and violent and beat her. Then we got best event, which honestly for a long ass time, the only thing I even had for this one was One Championship X, headlined by Angela Lee versus Stamp Fairtex, which I know that was the headline fight, but that card was ridiculous. It went on for 10 hours, and everyone who was in America who I was watching it with was asleep for half of it because there had just been a UFC card, and it all just kind of carried through. But it had so many fights. That was the card that had Demetrius Johnson versus Rod Tang, which was like weird and a kind of a meme thing, but it was fun and the kind of thing I like to see. We had Super Bomber versus Marat Gregorian, Nono versus Felipe Lobo. I can't even... Nikki Holzkin got knocked out by Sinsuma Klinmi on, the early prelims. I think maybe Sitichai versus Chingiz Alazov maybe was even on that. It was fucking insane. UFC 281.
Also, looking at 281, I'm noticing some fights that we could have added to other categories, like Carlos Barza versus Weili Zhang as biggest mismatch.
Oh, yeah, that is a good one.
Or like Dustin Poirier and Michael Chandler as best submission.
Yeah, I mean, there's always going to be stuff we're going to forget, I'm sure.
Yeah, you gotta take all of our listed fights with a grain of salt, as these are the ones we remembered.
Yeah, this is already going to be a hilariously long podcast. But yeah, what a crazy card. Yeah, I guess another almost fight of the year contender, at least round of the year contender in Michael Chandler versus Dustin Poirier. Of course, Alex Pereira taking the belt from Israel Adesanya, just one of the biggest moments of the year, and was just a great stacked card throughout. The first UFC London card was also just fucking hilariously violent. There was so many wacky finishes and some fun bangers. And I also thought UFC Paris deserved a mention for the same reason, but also just I thought that event had a great atmosphere, just because it was the first real big MMA event in France, which is a country who are big on their sports but haven't... MMA wasn't even legal there for a long time, and B, they just haven't had a big French fighter to really get behind. So that was just what a crowd, and it was a ton of great fights as well. So honestly, my favorite event was One Championship X.
For worst forbidden technique pick, where we look at what fights we fucked up the most.
Yeah, so now we're getting into the silly ones, and I thought this was fun. We picked Jorge Masvidal to beat Colby Covington, which I didn't think was that bad, but everyone else picked Colby Covington, and he did win pretty easily. He just got dinged pretty bad in the fourth round, and Masvidal was too gassed to chase the finish.
I think it's one where we were just kind of picking against bad information. Like, we were picking Masvidal as if he wasn't really far past it and going to gas just from Colby trying even a little.
Yeah, and I also laid out my biases that I don't think Colby Covington is actually good, but he's very effective, whereas Jorge Masvidal is very skilled but fights like a dumbass. And I still just had to pick the guy who I thought was just better at MMA skills in a vacuum, and that's not how fights work. And I guess I had to learn from that.
Yeah, and at least for me, picking the fight also, the people that were all confidently picking Colby were the people who really, really care a ton about getting it right, rather than being I'm not gonna pick Colby Covington.
Yeah, that's also fair.
You could put Colby Covington versus CM Punk, and I'd be I don't know, CM's got this.
Yeah. We also picked Edson Barboza to beat Bryce Mitchell.
And I don't even think that one's bad. I think it's just if we knew that Mitchell was that competent on the feet, and also that Edson was flatly just not going to be able to do anything on the ground at this point. He's just too past it. It was a great performance by Mitchell, certainly.
Yeah, I mean, the fight made us look stupid, but I don't know that it was that easy to pick going into it. It's kind of similarly with Cub Swanson versus Jonathan Martinez, where we were going to pick Cub Swanson because we love Cub Swanson, and in theory it seemed like a winnable matchup. And then Cub Swanson at bantamweight was still just small, but didn't have a speed edge, and has always struggled with ranged kickers.
Yeah, I feel those three are ones that we just kind of picked wrong because we didn't look at age appropriately, or like the age.
I mean, also I love Cub Swanson and Edson Barboza.
Yeah, like the way that age influences matchups is kind of like lost on you in certain matchups. But then the other two, I feel like are literally just bad picks we made.
Yeah, so not only did we pick Clay Guida to beat Claudio Poyes, we literally picked him specifically to not get knee barred by Claudio Poyes, and then he got knee barred by Claudio Poyes. And still with that one, I'm kind of like, I mean, could Clay Guida have just won that fight if he wasn't quite so Clay Guida and just had to just take down Claudio Poyes instantly and just let him do all of jiu-jitsu that he knew until he just got a submission in like 2 minutes?
That's like one of the only fights I'm actually embarrassed by my pick for, because realistically, he has the most fucking fights of like anyone. If you're gonna look at, and also he fights the same almost every single fight. So if you're going to get any...
But it was also like, there were people who were acting like they were smart because they were picking the guy who's got a couple of knee bars over the guy who's been submitted 10 times. I'm like, yeah, oh yeah, good for you, bro. Good pick.
Yeah, they weren't smart for getting it right. It was just like, oh, he got submitted, I do say knee bar. Like, that's not insightful. But I also feel like we should have at least been like, I don't know, Clay might lose this one.
I still, like, having seen that Dan Hooker fight, I'm still just like, how long do you have to not get submitted by Claudio Poyes for before he just loses an easy fight? But then the actual worst pick, it was Bobby Green to beat Islam Makhachev.
Yeah, if the fight was on wasn't on short notice and we picked the fight like that, it would be like, okay, yeah, I get that enough. You know, Bobby Green's like, he's a better defensive wrestler than he is even a defensive puncher. But it was 10 days notice, and there was absolutely no context to make you think that he would be able to win that off of other than like momentum vibes. It was basically we got like so into it. We were like, oh my god, Bobby Green's got this. He's got this. He just beat. He got beaten like barely by Fiziev. And he's now like fucking people up. He just like outclassed Nasrat. He's got this. Come on, fuck Islam up. But then Islam just got kneed in the body like 4 times, and then got the fight to the ground, and it looked like a mauling. He beat the shit out of him so much that Bobby Green wasn't even sportsmanlike after the fact and was kind of coping in interviews, talking about, oh yeah, this guy's just been on steroids since he was like 8. Like, it was a fight that fucked him up so badly that it like altered his character almost. So we were just wrong on that one. Like, we were just picking Bobby Green because we love Bobby Green and we're underrating Makhachev drastically. And the thing is, if you had given us another matchup with Makhachev, we would have been like, oh, okay, well, I mean, Makhachev is like, he's still really fucking good. Like, he's just going to beat this guy or this guy or this guy. But it's Bobby Green, so we're not going to do that.
Which is the theme with like most of these guys. Other than like, even though we don't like maybe love Jorge Masvidal specifically, we still like think he's neat and that Colby Covington sucks. So now on the other side, we had to engage in some mutual backslapping. I'm going to say best forbidden technique pick. And here we've got Victor Henry to out-hustle Hany Barcelos. Just because was a somewhat subversive pick. A lot of people didn't really think Victor Henry was ready for that kind of matchup, and that Hany Barcelos was a contender at bantamweight who just hadn't got the right matchups.
Yeah. I even remember there being people that thought, oh, wow, just a random generic white guy to come get dusted off the regionals by Hany Barcelos. And then we were like, we watched tape on this guy. He's fucking good. Like, he's been around. He was like Chris Curtis level savvy vet outside the UFC that should have been in the UFC for like 5 years.
Well, and it wasn't just the fact that I was like, oh, this guy's good, he's going to win. It was like, oh, this guy's got a really good style for diffusing counterpunches.
And then he overperformed as well.
It was a great performance. I put Paul Craig to triangle Nikita Krylov. I didn't think that was a particularly hard call, but like I said, there were people who were like, man, Paul Craig needs to stop playing off his back. Well, what was he doing? And he was just always going to get a triangle in that fight. We got Chito Vera to effortlessly destroy Rob Font, despite Sreeram's pushback. One that I had to put on here for context because seemed like an obvious pick to me, but we had Sreeram on to make a case for Rob Font, and Sreeram's smart and he knows how to explain things really well, and he made a very good case, and he would say a bunch of smart stuff, and then we kind of just be like, yeah, but he's going to get dusted, right? And it was a fight where it really just looked like no matter how much Rob Font tried to do, he just wasn't going to win it.
Yeah, he just got punked at kind of every opportunity. He would be landing hard shots on Cheeto, making Cheeto look slow, and also look just too reactionary. And then Cheeto would be like, okay, but I see something now. And then he would get a knockdown and then fuck him up really badly for the rest of the round. And then after a certain point, he just had gained so much respect from Font that he could get away with really anything he wanted. Even though Font kept up the pace as the fight went on, just because he's not going to give up throwing volume. He's just recognized, wow, I'm getting dropped a lot. He dropped with a hook kick because the fight was so free at a certain point, and he just had him reacting to everything.
This is a kind of out there one, but I have got my pick I've written down Silas picking Yan to beat Alexander Rakic by some kind of weird attritional leg falling off TKO stoppage, which my actual pick was that Yan was going to get a stoppage from checking low kicks, and I mean it kind of happened. Everyone was like, oh, Rakic just blew his knee out weirdly. I'm like, no, he got out low kicked, and his low kicks defended the shit out of in an offensive way multiple times, and then his knee fell off. So I still got to feel kind of vindicated by that one in my own crazy fucking bananas mental gymnastics way, so I was going to throw it in there. One that I was actually most impressed by was Christian picking Brad Riddell to get dinged early and then shoot into a ghillie against Jalen Turner, and then by extension both of us picking Riddell to get dinged by a 1-2 and then RNC'd against Donato Moicano. Yeah,
Brad Riddell, a bit of a cheat code for it, because once you get a read on Brad Riddell, I think you can pick his fights with 100% certainty. And now we have enough data on it to be like, oh, okay, this is how he operates in this matchup. This is how he operates in this matchup. Really, the only type of fight I can imagine being a hard one for me to pick is something where if you were to fight maybe Terrence McKinney, because it's about, is he durable enough to just eat shit before Terrence McKinney gasses? Or maybe Terrence McKinney even submits him, something like that. So, really, I was just, for the Jalen Turner fight, I just saw it in my head. I was like, there's no way that he doesn't get dinged throwing a low kick or something. Or even if it wasn't a low kick, just if he got dinged doing something from too far away, trying to
that was the thing we said, I was throwing out. I was like, is this fight going to be a draw? Because I know Brad Riddell is going to get fucked up in the first round, but I don't know what's going to happen after that. And you're kind of just like, well, he's probably just going to get dinged, and then he will wrestle because he's an MMA fighter. And then he'll probably just shoot into a guillotine. And yeah, Moicano was, once we'd seen that, it's just oh yeah, this guy can aggressively counter and has a great backtake game.
Yeah, so I think probably the actual winner for that one, for the best one we got, was the Brad Riddell duo of us both just kind of knowing how to pick Brad Riddell fights. Forbidden Technique Award for funniest actually viable fighting move, not to be confused for Forbidden Technique Award for most viable funny fighting.
Yeah, I'm not sure which one it's supposed to be, but yeah, we got a particularly silly one here where we always like to discuss the efficacy of non-traditional techniques that come up in MMA. And
it's kind of like the name of the podcast.
It's exactly where that comes from. So I had to throw it in there. And particularly, it's always fun whenever you see a finish or just something happen in a fight with a move that you just didn't think was going to work. And then you're like, oh, everybody's going to be trying that. So, of course, had to include the aforementioned axe kick to the body from guard, which Irene Aldana finished Macy Chiasson with. A personal favorite of mine is the reverse up elbow off of wrist control, kind of the Anderson Silva, Tony Strickland style, but doing it off of wrist control in the clinch actually makes it like way more effective, because if you just use your open glove to just yank down on your opponent's wrist, then there's essentially no way they can bring that hand back up to like defend their chin by the time you've just like whipped your elbow back up to hit them in the face, because like it's already like kind of cocked to just do that from you yanking their arm down. So like I like that one. The pimp backhand is also fun, that we've seen like utilized to some degree of actual effectiveness in a couple of fights this year. I remember there was a moment where Calvin Kattar overthrew on a right hand against Giga Chikadze, and just where a lot of guys would like turn through to do like a spinning back fist off of the other side, he kind of just like backhanded him with his right hand. And also Jared Cannonier fucked up Derek Brunson with the similar thing after like hitting like a folding elbow and then a backhand on the other way before finishing him.
Yeah, and then overcuts, that shit's just perfect.
Okay, for Christian, for the uninitiated, explain overcuts.
Okay, so it's when your back is taken, or even just any position where your opponent's behind you. It doesn't necessarily have to be a strict back take, where you just do punches over your own shoulder. It can be from either side. You can punch across yourself behind your shoulder. You can just punch like directly behind yourself. You can even do like an old martial arts movie style, like backhand behind your head. But any technique that involves you hitting someone, and the reason for the name is an uppercut is like an upstrike where you kind of hook it around, whereas an overcut is just it's just you do it farther to where it is now an overcut. It's fucking stupid. I remember the first time I ever thought of the name was against Steve Garcia versus Luis Pena, where I think Steve Garcia actually won the fight purely off of overcuts.
So the thing about overcuts is I've never been sure about overcuts as a viable move, because the problem is, as you said, with the Steve Garcia fight, he didn't win the fight against Luis Pena. They scored the back control over the overcuts. But this year may mark a change in the potential effectiveness of overcuts as an actual fight winning move, because I believe it was Andre Fili versus Bill Algeo. In the last round, Bill Algeo actually won the third round on at least one judge's card by just fucking Andre Fili up with long boy overcuts while he had his back taken. Like, he looked like he had Andre Fili actually kind of rocked from those overcuts. So we may actually see this be a useful move moving forward.
It's a genuinely dangerous move if you're going against someone who's not particularly good at choking you, but is good at keeping your back. Yeah, and then we got pelvic thrust to face from north-south, because it's fucking funny. It's not necessarily like the best technique, but it's funny.
Yeah, I don't even know if that was this year, but we didn't talk about it when I don't even remember who did it. It was just some heavyweight guy who had a guy north-south and just started smashing him in the face with his cup. Shit was funny. Okay. And now another silly weird award. I tried not to have too many of these, but we've got most legit injury TKO of the year, which is one because like I feel like we're always the guys that when there's some kind of weird fight-ending result that isn't like a traditional what we think of as a finish or a decision or whatever, everyone's like, oh well, that doesn't count. And we're always kind of the guys.
We're always devil's advocate for it.
Yeah, maybe it did count though. I also think we're kind of we just have the mentality that like, yeah, finish is a finish. Like if I had won a fight like Arnold Allen beat Calvin Kattar, I'd be like getting up on the cage like, yeah,
yeah. I fucking out footworked this guy to the point to where he jumped and broke his own leg. Like that's like the Willie Pep win without getting hit shit.
Exactly. Even though it technically ends with a low kick after Calvin Kattar had blown out his knee, he still like actually outmaneuvered Calvin Kattar to the point that he threw a strike that put him so out of position that he just destroyed his own leg.
That's my pick for it this year.
That's fair. Yair Rodriguez versus Brian Ortega. Yair throws up an armbar, Brian Ortega defends it, and then suddenly his arm falls off.
I think that might just be up there for most legit submission victory of the year, because he went for a submission and injured his opponent. That's what submissions do.
Jan Blachowicz versus Alexander Rakic for the reasons that I mentioned earlier. Curtis Blades versus Tom Aspinall, probably, that did seem like a pretty random thing. I guess at most you could say that Curtis Blades being well-ranked and a well-regarded fighter just made Tom Aspinall so jumpy that he just came out too hot, just moving too much, and his leg fell off. And then Denise Bondar versus Malcolm Gordon, where he just posted defending a takedown and his arm went the wrong way after Gordon had kind of thrown up an armbar earlier in the fight. I respect the Arnold Allen versus Calvin Kattar pick, but for me it's Jan Blachowicz versus Alexander Rakic, because that was an actual injury stoppage, but that was just caused by stuff that clearly happened in the fight.
Yeah, and also we mentioned earlier the Aljamain Sterling versus TJ Dillashaw one, where that one just doesn't really fall into this category because he was injured before the fight started. They knew about it too. The fight, I don't think Aljamain Sterling knew, but everyone else knew, and then it showed up immediately. So that it just doesn't really fall into the category. I think the winner for this category is Arnold Allen versus Calvin Kattar. Pretty clearly, it was him winning the first round and then also tricking Kattar into jumping so far out of just very out of pocket decision, shot making wise or shot selection wise, that was heavily influenced by the way that Arnold Allen was moving.
Okay, so we're going to finish off on a nice one, since there's been a lot of retirements this year. A lot of old people getting fed into the wood chipper and realizing they don't have it anymore. And so I wanted to take a moment to pay tribute to the old dogs that are still hanging on. We got Best Old Man Win, and this is a pretty stacked field this year, and it's nice to see. The first one that I put on here, because it just seemed obvious, was Rafael Assunção coming back against Victor Henry. A fantastic veteran technician who'd been on a really hard run of just fighting incredibly dangerous guys after being passed up by the promotion, passed up for title shots when he was clearly one of the best bantamweights in the world for a very long time. And it seemed like the time had finally just caught up to him, and he put on an absolute clinic against a guy who, we said earlier, was a really dangerous fighter, and in a lot of ways seemed like he could have been a really rough matchup for Assunção, and was an easy 30-27.
Yeah, I remember thinking that the decision was closer than that, but also still having it for Assunção, so it wasn't a robbery or anything close. It was just I thought it was just a great performance in a competitive fight.
Yeah, and Victor Henry wasn't useless in the fight at all, but Assunção just did everything right and looked like a close to prime version of himself.
And then in a more old man type of way, Jim Miller fought Nicholas Mota, and he used old man power.
And just that was a huge experience differential as well. Mota was an okay athletic prospect, just was not quite ready for someone as seasoned as Jim Miller. And I mean, Jim Miller just absolutely spun his brain by being southpaw and doing low kicks, and then just decked him with a beautiful right hook. Francisco Trinaldo versus Danny Roberts. You got to throw in there because Danny Roberts, beatable but dangerous, and Francisco Trinaldo has got to be one of the oldest guys in the UFC at this point. He's fucking ancient.
Yeah, he's so old that it seems like they might be lying about his age. Right. Then just Andrei Arlovsky existing.
Yeah, he's also
any fight he doesn't lose.
Yeah, which is a remarkable amount of them these days.
Yeah, had a crazy good win streak for a while.
Yeah, I don't even remember who he beat this year, and he lost to DeLima. It'd be like that.
It's about as bad of a matchup as you can get.
Yeah, and he's still just hanging around, like just boxing up jobbers. Like he was at like he was literally at like UFC 40 or something. Like he's been around for so long.
Yeah, he beat Jared Vandera and Jake Collier.
There you go. That's not nothing. Gerald Meerschaert versus Bruno Silva was just like, it was kind of out of nowhere. Because, Bruno Silva had a competitive striking match where he hung in there for a full 3 rounds with Alex Pereira. And then Gerald Meerschaert, just consummately outclassed Bruno Silva and had a defensive masterclass, and then finished him and dropped Bruno Silva with a left hook in the 3rd round where Alex Pereira failed. So that was just fucking incredible. I love GM3, but it seemed like the perfect matchup for him to just get fucking murderized, and he looked like a god.
Yeah, and also the submission was actually really fucking nice too. So was not an easy guy to submit. He's kind of normally a structure of his, or a function of his game is that he's hard to grapple, but he can fuck you up with ground and pound. So if you accidentally let him on top of you, he'll kill you.
Yeah, Sitachai versus Muhammad Butasa, a kickboxing fight in one championship where Sitachai coming off his loss in a very competitive fight to clearly a top guy in the world right now in Chingiz Alazov, and Muhammad Butasa was just like a young guy, and he was fucking huge and athletic, and this was like Sitachai having his Cub Swanson versus Duho Choi fight, where he's just like, oh, well, this guy's just, his thing is just being huge and athletic and hitting hard. And he's just going to try and walk up to me and kill me. Well, fuck this. Just like I was saying earlier with Sitachai, if you can bring a fight to him and take him out of his comfort zone, he will just stand there and just have trades with you and just be tougher and more experienced and craftier. And he just put a beating on a young undefeated guy who thought he could just go in there and steamroll a legend.
Then we got Overeem versus Badr Hari, which is hard for me to not have as my favorite best old man win. Because Overeem...
it was awesome. Because I love Alistair Overeem.
It's also one of the only ones on the list where it's an old man versus an old man. And the older man got fucked up worse. Badr Hari... The issue, though, is that Badr Hari's been in kickboxing all this time, while Overeem hasn't competed in kickboxing in a very long time. He's just been doing MMA. And then Overeem's like, you know what? I'm back, bitch, and just fucks him up. And has a difficult fight, but still easily win, or not easily gets the decision.
Well, and should have got a finish if the ref wasn't just in Badr Hari's pocket.
Yeah.
And he just MMA kickboxed Badr Hari. The commentary's just Overeem, he's an MMA fighter. He's very unorthodox with the way he moves and his shot selection. Also he genuinely looked fucking ancient. He looked jacked again, but he looked really slow and clunky. But he's a smart fighter, and he's always understood how to keep adapting to his limitations. And we basically picked that fight just based on cosmic justice, because Alistair Overeem can actually display heart and stage comebacks now because he's a nice person, and Badr Hari has always been a terrible person and falls apart even in fights that he's winning.
Yeah.
And the last one on here, recent one, Stephen Wonderboy Thompson against Kevin Holland. Just doesn't look like an old man unless you wrestle him.
Yeah, this is an old man win where we just got to actually see him in a fight where he gets to strike with someone, which we haven't gotten to see over 5 in a fight where someone's actually going to take it to him in a long time. It was a fight where he was actually able to get a finish, because we haven't seen a fucking Wonderboy Thompson finish in 5 years or something.
Yeah, and which, also, even in the fights that he's been winning, he's just been breaking his hands on the granite faces of Vicente Luque and Jeff Neal. Yeah, it was just it was a matchup where we got to just see all of vintage Wonderboy with some new wrinkles as well. He's another guy who's going to keep trying to improve things, even though his wrestling is not going to get any better at this point. There were new wrinkles to his striking game and shot selection that we haven't really seen in a lot of fights before, and it was just an insane pace. It was a fucking war. Like, he got fucked up and had to come back, and he did every kick that there is.
Yeah, if you gave him an extra round, he probably would have invented a new. So that, I don't know. I think my pick for best old man win is, it might be a Sun Tzu versus Victor Henry.
I think it's a Sun Tzu Henry for me.
Yeah, like, I want to pick a different one, because I didn't think I just personally wasn't like that enthused by it. I liked it. Like, I thought it was cool and a great performance, but I don't have like a personal affinity for the fight, unlike Overeem versus Badr Hari or Mearshart versus Bruno Silva. But Victor Henry's really fucking good, and a Sun Tzu had looked ragged.
It seemed like
lately.
a Sun Tzu was done. So yeah, that's the show. It's been the Forbidden Technique podcast. If you enjoyed this content and all the other great stuff that the Fight Site puts out, please consider supporting us on Patreon. A pledge of just $5 gains access to a huge library of really high quality analytical fight content, as well as to a Discord server where we have a great community of fight fans from a ton of different backgrounds. We're always having great discussions, getting together to watch fights, and you can talk to staff and ask us questions and stuff. You can ask me about how I score the coolness of knockouts. Yeah. This has been the Forbidden Technique podcast, and we'll see you soon.
Later.
Peace.